Welcome everybody to this week's Matrexit discussion group call. Like I say, this beautiful Sunday, the first day of the week, not the 7th, so therefore not the Sabbath. Yesterday was the 7th, Sabbat, and it was quite an interesting day, I guess, especially if you're in the Middle East. Last week, we covered modern money mechanics and information that's provided to everybody as far as how the financial system really works, how the money system works, how it's viewed, how the Federal Reserve and the Treasury looks at what money is and how it functions. And this week I wanted to do just a little bit of a recap on that before I go on to some other things and share knowledge that is readily available out there, but most people don't see it, mostly because they don't go looking for it. And to me, a big chunk of this is because of something that we hear all the time, whether you watch television or news channels, whatever, radio. You constantly hear people talking about, look at where your tax dollars are going. We hear that concept. Let me tell you something. When you hear that from one of these talking heads or a newscaster, you need to comprehend immediately that they are lying to you because they know the truth. At least they should know these things. If anybody does, it would be them. So if you go back and look at the 1982 Grace Commission that was formed under Ronald Reagan, it was actually called the Private Sector Survey on Cost Control. That was the actual name of it, PSSCC. And on the first or second page of that report, they immediately tell you 100% of taxes go to interest on the national debt before any money ever goes to any services. So guess what? Tax money, every dollar spent in the taxes is going to pay off the interest on the national debt. No, it's not going to check out some weird testing on some bizarre animal in some other country somewhere else, or rats or anything. No, that's not what's happening. So when you hear people saying that those stupid little things is where your money is going to, your money is getting wasted, no. If the money is getting wasted anywhere, it's going to pay off the interest on the national debt, which means that every dollar that is being spent on all these public services, that's all being done with borrowed money, as we covered last week, the way that money is borrowed from the Treasury through promissory notes, investments, things like that. And at the same time, that this is one of the reasons I would say why the voter is referred to as a constituent. You'll always hear representatives, senators, congressmen, whatever, and they'll talk about their constituents. And that name comes from the word constitutor. And a constitutor is one who agrees to pay off the debt of another, which is exactly what's happening. The taxpayers are paying off the interest on the debts that Congress has created. Also, if you go and look into the Constitution, look into Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, that's really, I think, one of the best sections in there, because it does a couple things. The first thing in there a lot of people point to is that it says that no state shall make anything other than gold or silver for the payment of debt. Which is why everybody yells and screams and says, oh, see, the Federal Reserve is fraud, the Treasury is fraud, they're a private company, they're no more federal than Federal Express, it's supposed to be the government doing this. But unfortunately, what the government does with everything across the board is they're going and farming everything out to independent agencies. That's the bureaucracy that's running everything. What really should have been written into the Constitution was that Congress was also not allowed to franchise out the business business of making the script or the US dollar, Federal Reserve note, whatever they want to make, and they weren't allowed to farm that out, to another franchise or to an independent, especially not to an independently owned organization. That's where the real problem is at. But also within that clause, it also states in there that no state shall impair the obligation of contracts. I think they kind of did that to cover their butt on the first part because they knew they were probably going to be farming out the task of creating the money or printing the money. But at the same time, you can use these things for yourself. That's what I really recommend. Take the things that you think they're using against you, and guess what? If it's good enough for the goose, it's good enough for the gander. You can use that for yourself as well. No state shall impair the obligation of a contract. I would say that's one of the best things that people could use for their businesses, especially looking over the past 2-3 years where different businesses got shut down. Well, you know what? If you were contracted with your customers to supply a service to them, you couldn't have been shut down, could you? At the same time, there's also other ways of taking care of paying off debts. Now, since it was only gold and silver that was to be used for paying off debts, that tells you that guess what? Nobody, unless you use gold or silver, nobody has ever paid for anything. You think you've paid off your car, you think you pay your electric bill, your phone bill. No, you haven't. You've only discharged it with United States dollars. That's all you've done. That's what discharge is really all about. People think it's this magical system they got to go search out and find and they'll be able to pay all their bills that way. No. That's what you're doing with the USD. That's what you're doing with Federal Reserve notes. You're just discharging it. Because in order to pay it, the only way of payment constitutionally would have been with gold or silver. And that's not even recognized. Hartford and Dyke wrote an excellent book I recommend people take a look at. I'll throw a link to that down in the notes here. It's called Currencies for Local Communities. I remember checking a few years ago, and there was upwards of 70 different types of script or money other than the Federal Reserve note being used in the USA. Many of them are in the Northeast. There's a few in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, even just north of Atlanta. There's a town there that they've got their own money supply. That's definitely how they can tell that you're an outsider when you come in, stop at the gas station or whatever, and you're opening your wallet and you're handing them something other than what they use. Yeah, that definitely shows them that you're an outsider. But yeah, there's ways that can be done. That can be done, and that also falls right back to Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the Constitution, that no state can impair the obligation of a contract. If you are contracted with each other to use something else other than the Federal Reserve note, there's your answer. Go ahead and use it. I really don't know what the patriot community thinks when they yell and scream about the Treasury being unconstitutional or the Federal Reserve being unconstitutional. Did they think that Nancy Pelosi was supposed to be setting up printing presses in the halls of Congress? No, they always farm things out from there. One of the biggest things people don't comprehend, and I've heard for years how the US dollar is going to collapse. And now, since there's this new thing called cryptocurrency around, everybody's like, oh, they're going to go to cryptocurrency. Well, nobody would have said that 10 years ago. But they were still saying back then that the US dollar was going to crash. But what they've done is that they've changed things just a little bit, because no country, I don't think, has ever survived more than a couple hundred years using a script that was printed from a third party. And that's why I say right now, if you go back and listen to last week's episode, that's why there is now a one world money system in place, because the same people that are printing the United States dollar are also supplying money for the Bank of England, for the People's Bank of China. They're doing this for all these other countries as well. and Canada. I mean, it's not just localized or centralized to the United States of America. It's done worldwide. But what they've done, the things that they've kind of changed or morphed in it a little bit, is that the system that they're using doesn't use that US dollar, that Federal Reserve note. That's what the peasants use. What they're using is they're using debt or credit. A lot of times people look at that and they may even see them as being separate, or actually they're really one and the same. I remember listening to a gentleman one time. He went to his father, him and his newly wed wife decided that they want to buy a house. So he went to his father and was talking to his father about getting some help maybe for a down payment. And his dad looked at him and thought, well, what are you talking about? You don't need any help for anything. So when you were born, I set you up with a whole life insurance policy. That is your bank. And I'd recommend people go read Nelson Nash. Nelson Nash wrote the book, Be Your Own Banker. And I have to read it a couple times. There's even bankers that I've heard talk about that book, and they had to read it several times and wrap their mind around it, because it is looking at debt and credit as being something totally different than what we're trying to think it is. Well, that was the issue with this young man. And he said to his dad, he said, what are you talking about? And his dad said, borrow the money for your down payment from your whole life policy, from your insurance policy. And he thought, but Dad, that's going to make it look like, it's borrowed money. It's going to make it look like I'm using debt. Can't use debt as a down payment. His father said, trust me, go to the bank and do what I told you. So that's what he did. He went, applied for the loan, showed him where he was getting the down payment from. The girl on their side of the desk smiled and says, oh, that's perfect, because that's actually considered an asset, not a liability. Even though you think that if you're borrowing something, it's going to be debt or it's going to be a liability. In this case, no, it's not. It's not a debt at all. It's a positive for you. And so much around this idea of there being a crash to the dollar or things being changed. Well, what's one of the biggest arguments people have, for instance, about going to a crypto? They say, oh, that's because they want to be able to track everything you're doing with your money. They want to track everywhere your dollar goes. Well, hold on. If they're going to be able to track everywhere your dollar goes, then that means they're going to be able to track everywhere their dollar goes. And other people are going to know what they're doing with the money. Are they going to want that? Absolutely not. Again, this will be a link down in the notes here on YouTube, but go and listen to Catherine Austin Fitts. A little 2.5-minute talk that she gave on a speech called The Red Button. Because this was back in the year 2000. That's what, 23 years ago. At that time, she was saying that upwards of $1 trillion was being spent in criminal activity. And she referred to it as dirty money. But she also reminded the people during the speech that, and she put out a big red button. Anybody that wants, if you want, you can come up and hit that big red button, and it will end all the use of this dirty money, which is what using cryptocurrency would do. She said, but remember, your retirement funds are going to crash, your IRAs are going to crash, your mutuals are going to crash, stock market's going to crash. Did anybody want to go up and hit that red button? No, there was only one man or woman that would go up there and do it. Why not? Because they didn't want to lose what they had. They're willing to see the criminal activity and black ops, whatever, going on behind the scenes, as long as they were financially okay. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of people have found themselves. I think we really need to clean the slate as to what we were taught. Because the more you get in and research these things, you're going to find that things operate way more different than what you were taught in school or what they try to indoctrinate you with on television. Because, you know, from what I covered last week and for the last few minutes, did anybody in school ever mention any of these things about money? Did they ever tell you about any of this? Of course not. So we've got to put aside those things. We got to put aside things that we see or read on social media, about the banks and about how they work, because the majority of people really don't know. They're just guessing. And I really recommend, when you read a book by somebody, for instance, first go and look and see what they're listing on the book as to where their resources came from. You know, what kind of crib notes did they have or whatever, you know. Uh, Go and find their source material. If they're not supplying any source material, then odds are they could be just dreaming things up out of their head. Yeah. And this comes also, I hear people talk a lot about, you know, they're talking about a democracy. Well, the Constitution says we're supposed to have a Republican form of government, you know, but we're a republic. We've lost our republic. You know, it's a democracy now. Well, and so many people here push this over and over are people that should be well learned on this topic. And it shocks me if they're saying this, or maybe they're just saying it because they know that this will help attract people, you know, get on their bandwagon and be a listener to them. Let me read you a definition. In your mind, what do you think this is a definition is? All right. A system of government by the whole population ruled through elected representatives. What does that sound like? Sound like a republic? Guess what? That's the definition for a democracy. In fact, if you go and look up the definition for democracy and side by side, look at the definition for republic, you're going to find that they're identical. They're practically the exact same thing, just worded maybe slightly different. The reason being is because democracy is not a form of government, it's an ideology. A republic is a form of government. That's why you see the majority of all the 193 nations that are members of the UN are republics, including the People's Republic of China. Guess what? Socialism falls right under that definition of republic. If you go into law nations and read how the governments are set up, look at it talks about the relationships between different governments, between different sovereigns, between people and their government, or relationships just between people alone within the government. You know, I can't stress enough to read that. It really wraps your head around what's going on. In fact, that's even mentioned as well in the Constitution. And by mere mention, lets you know that that is part of what the United States or the Constitution was based on, was the law of nations. And comprehend how it describes what popular sovereignty is. Because we hear a lot of people talk and say, oh, the people are sovereign, we're sovereign, the government works for us. Sorry, no, it doesn't. You know, try and go fire a government official if you think they work for you. See how that works out for you. The way everything is really set up is under popular sovereignty, which means the sovereignty of the populace is transferred. Kind of think of power of attorney, for instance. Look at that scenario. The sovereignty of the population is given up to the elected officials. They hold the sovereignty of the nation. That's really what popular sovereignty boils down to. It's not really about individual sovereignty. That is something that is dismantled. Whether it's a democracy or a republic, it's dismantled because it is given up to the elected officials who are set up to rule the country. Bottom line, it's just the way it operates, not a matter of opinion. And so, looking at things like that people talk about, those are some of the things that identify us, identify who people are and what they are, as well as the things that you write, maybe documents that you write. That identifies who you are or what level of comprehension you have or level of education, or if you're still being indoctrinated with this idea that, the public servants work for you, that kind of thing. It'll stand right out through your communications with it. Even simple things as far as knowing the kind of grammar to use. I'll notice people will write something, and at the end of the sentence, they'll put what's called the ellipsis there. And they may put 10, 15, 20 periods after it. Which an ellipsis, what it is, it's stating that maybe there's some words left out or there's more to say on this topic than can be added at that point. But an ellipsis is only 3 periods. It's only 3 dots. It's not 5, 10, 15, 20 that a lot of people use. So when you see that, you immediately know, okay, this person doesn't know anything about grammar, and they don't even know what those dots mean that they're using. They've probably just seen other people use that before. I've also seen websites where people will list, all of these court cases that back up what they're doing. And they'll list these court cases as, say, Smith vs. period Jones, for like Smith versus Jones. And they'll list all their court cases that way, in that style. I immediately know they don't know anything about law or how the court system probably even works. Otherwise, they would know that you only use that style in, common communications, maybe back and forth or in a writing between a couple people, but not on a website, not in a document. The only thing you use is the period. That's your symbol for verses. It's not VS period. So things like that stand right out and let you know that people have no idea even the background behind what they're doing. Or even the use of the colon. Some people would say full colon. There really is no such thing as full colon. It's either colon or semicolon. And no, a colon is not used in a name. A colon is used to signify that after that colon, there's going to be a list of something or maybe some more dialogue regarding it. No, it has nothing to do with a name being used. And in fact, go look it up. A lot of people like to use, say, Chicago Styles Manual, something like that. Go and read up on how the colon's used. It's not recognized in names. You'll never see it in names. The hyphen is, never the colon. And at the same time, you hear a lot of people, the same people that scream about, Republican or Republic versus democracy, that kind of thing. Hear them at the same time talk about how they've turned you into a corporation. Or they've made you into a corporation. I'm sorry. Number one, that's a physical, legal, and lawful impossibility. You cannot be made into a corporation by another party. In fact, you cannot even be made into a corporation on your own doing. It takes a whole lot more to be a corporation than just in all cap letters. That doesn't immediately turn something into a corporation. Corporations are not recognized until after their letters of incorporation are filed. Ooh, okay, where's your letters of incorporation? They also have their own rules. They have their own officers. Who's your treasurer? Who's your secretary? Who's the president of your corporation? And none of those things are found. Your list of rules. So where are those? No. Corporation isn't a single man or woman. It's actually a body of people make up a corporation. In fact, that's even in the definition for a corporation, is that it's a group of people that are basically united for the same cause. Okay, that should tell you right there. Number one, you're not a corporation. So any of the gurus or whatever, they're out there trying to tell you that. In fact, I'll even go a step further as far as some evidence or proof. All corporations are listed with the Security and Exchange Commission. The SEC is very searchable. Go on the SEC the Security and Exchange Commission website and look up your all cap name. See if you're really a corporation or not, because you're absolutely not. These are just some very small basics that mean a whole lot that we need to comprehend when we're doing our legal research. And I'm trying to start keeping these down to 20, 30 minutes long, nice and short, and along with additional information in the notes below. So if you want to do some more study on your own, you can, because you know what? It's nobody else's fault that we weren't educated. Our education is dependent on one man and one woman alone, and that's me and you. Bottom line, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves. So have a good educational week, guys. Good night.